All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to our Camp AIAS event tonight. Today, we are hosting our first Professor Spotlight of the semester. And Professor Spotlights are an opportunity for any professor or faculty member of CAPPA to come join us and present a lecture for everybody. We usually ask that they try to keep the lecture related to architecture or design or the field in general, but we give them an opportunity to talk about whatever they are interested in, what they work on, whatever they research. It's a great opportunity for students to learn about and see a professor they may have already had, understand them in more of a personal context outside of their studio or their elective they may have taken previously. But it's also a great opportunity for students who may not have had these professors to see what CAPPA offers, what they may be teaching in their elective or studio, and take them in the future. You really get to see a professor's passions and interests within the field of architecture. So with that, tonight we are joined by Professor Wheat, who will be presenting a lecture titled Understanding Design from Process to Presentation. It will be more of a discussion, so we're opening up the end of this event for a Q&A. So of course keep questions in the back of your mind for Professor Wheat. But he has taught different studios for all grade levels here at CAPPA, but usually he works with graduate students, and he also offers various electives throughout the year at CAPPA. I've heard we may be joined by some cats of his, but besides that, we are very excited to have him come and present with camp tonight. So please help me welcome Professor Wheat, and with that, I'm going to go ahead and open up the floor to him.
Hi, everyone, and welcome. So today we're going to talk about understanding design. It's less of a presentation and more of a discussion and kind of some highlights on things that I've learned from students over the last 12 years or so that tend to be a little bit better habits for being a better student. And so I can't promise you everything that I listed on my blurb for what this is going to be about, but I'm going to talk about most of them. And I've written down everything from that I'm going to pretty much read off of, and then I'll add more to it. And at the end, if you guys want to discuss any points in particular, I'd be happy to. So we'll start with, where do ideas come from? Which is one of the most elusive things that we find as designers. Ideas don't, especially good ideas, right? We don't just conjure them up. There's something that we have to discover. We have to be in a process of working on something, and then your mind finds the idea that you want to show. It's like this aha moment that we all have when designing something, and it just clicks for us. We can, I think, start off with general like concepts, broad strokes about what direction we want to take it, but it's more like a scent of blood in the water, right? We know it's in this direction, but we don't know exactly where it is. And so we just start going in that direction, and then maybe we sort of meander around it. But ideas, you have to sort of accept that ideas are not invented. When you have to come up with an idea, you can't just come up with one. You have to start working on a problem, and then the idea is discovered. And if you become at peace with that, all that anxiety about coming up with an idea for your professor kind of goes out the window. You lose that sense of, I need to come up with this brilliant idea to start off with. I would say the easiest way to feel comfortable about coming up with an idea or having an idea itself is doing research. Now, there's no revelation here from all of you guys. We start every semester with precedent research. But most students look at precedent research, find like one thing actually about it that they do. But I mean research in a more broader sense, beyond just simply the building typology that you're looking at. Research for what kind of architect you want to be, what kind of spaces are you doing. And so if your building program calls for an auditorium, then that alone could be a set of something to research, is how other architects do auditoriums, how they deal with the baffling, what scale are these things at, how do they deal with stages and circulation. But most students will just make a rectangular box and call it an auditorium. Maybe grab a CAD file of some seats and throw that in the middle and think that they've designed it, which programmatically you might have laid it out schematically, but you haven't really designed the space. And so I would say in some ways, you want to dedicate yourself to how other architects solve a problem. Try to see how they are seeing and do this. And this seems obvious. And I push students on everything that you're going to present. So each time we do something new in my studio, I want you to bring a precedent, something that you're looking at to present and show this is what I'm seeing, and this is how I want to take my project. This is the direction that I want to take it. We don't really, and I would include myself in this, we're not really good designers. I think you develop a sense of proportioning that will make you a good designer, but the ideas and the real organization of it, spatially and plan section, all that comes from looking at examples and asking yourself how other architects do it. You think that my job is to teach you those things, but I think I can only really make you aware of them, and you have to bring a lot on your end to make these things happen. For instance, I'll have students bring in, I'll say, show me what it is that you're looking at and which direction you want to take. And a lot of times they'll bring in precedent images, but some of them are just terrible. I hate to say it. You guys, you find things that look cool and you bring them to me and you're like, I want to do this, but it's completely not appropriate for the climate, typology, or even building program. And so it's almost like a window shopping whenever I send students out to find precedents. You'll find all these images and collect them, but they don't really pertain to our project. And so I would say to that you want to be able to categorize how you find the precedent images. I find a ton of images whenever I'm looking for a project that I realize I like, but aren't necessarily appropriate, but I still want to keep them. And so I would highly recommend creating a catalog of all of these things that you find online, especially through Pinterest and what's the other big one? Instagram. And then start collecting images categorizing them. And so when you find something like, whether it's imagery of how people are representing their work, or whether it's actually something internal, like auditoriums, for instance, or aquariums that they use, just start making subfolders that kind of categorize all this so you can go back to them later whenever they are appropriate. Hold on one second. All right, so the question is, how do you interpret these examples once you have them? And what I would do is pin them up. I worked at home a lot when I was in school. I regret that considerably, particularly in my upper years, because I missed out on a lot of the exchanges that happen in studio, all that fun stuff. But in my office, I filled the walls, similar to what's happening behind me, with examples. And so I would print off everything, and right in front of me, I'd paste up all of these examples, and I would do just kind of small prints and cut them out. And I would flood it so that as I'm working, I would look up at the examples and try to be inspired by them. If I'm just designing, I tend to be a fairly pragmatic person, and I'm less creative than I'd like to be. And so I pin these examples up so that I'm constantly aware of them and I'm absorbing them in a lot of ways. And those start to influence the decisions that I make. They arouse my inspiration for the project. And I need those images to do that. I need a direction that I'm trying to push, that I want an image. When I say image, like a feeling of a space that I'm wanting to capture, I need to be aware of that, and I need to see it constantly for it to be on my mind of doing the space. Otherwise, I tend to revert back to it being kind of more of a stale, static space. Mostly everything's in alignment, and I become very OCD, and I lose a lot of the creativity that I'm trying to. What is it? She's on me. I would also design with a book in my lap. Particularly in undergrad, I used Richard Meyer because of his plans and sections and the complexity of them. And elevations. I looked to him a lot for elevations. I probably have relied heavily on Meyer through, I would say, my entire undergrad. And then in grad school, I started advancing to other architects that had not quite as busy elevations and like flexing their muscles at how creative I can do this cool composition, but more about, I think I went from Meyer to Tado Ando, the Fort Worth Modern, right? And I loved his plans. They had a little bit more poetry to them, and the spaces seemed a little bit more simpler. And I think that was kind of like my winding down, sort of settling down. Instead of making these very highly complex buildings, how can I make something that seemed to have more meaning to it, at least meaning to me as I was designing it? And so if you find things that you like or a book that you like, set it in your lap, leave it open, flip through it whenever you get to like a halt, like a design block where you just can't really come up with anything else. Go through it, spend time absorbing the images, then go back to designing. That's exactly how I did it in undergrad, and I still do it in a lot of ways that to this day. I need to have images around me that inspire me and that remind me of the direction that I'm taking the project. And so don't just look at them and close them, or put them in a folder, print them out and keep them out where you see them. Okay. You could also think of it like seeing architecture, experiencing is one thing. Finding images is another, and reading is another one that kind of involve you to this. But like a writer, you never find a writer that doesn't read. So that's a part of the process. And I think traveling and seeing are sort of writing and experience, and also seeing images and being critical of them, thinking about how the other architect makes those spaces. And I'm going to get back to that in a minute. All right. So which ideas are good, which are bad, and which are ugly? This is kind of easy to sort of accept at first. Be comfortable with the fact that most of your ideas are bad. We have a lot of anxiety about coming up with good ideas. I do, at least, especially when I'm first time to present or show something in the professional world, or even with students, right? I want to make sure that it's done to the right way. I just want it to be perfect. I think we all have that sort of sense with this. But when I was in grad school, I remember my first ideas on all of my projects were so, I would talk about my narrative, and then I would literally do what I talked about. And I would have to explain at the end of my presentation that this is not what my building is going to look like, but I couldn't conceptualize. And so I had to go through making a literal interpretation of my analysis in ways that are very crude and embarrassing looking back now. But that was my process. I couldn't just jump to conceptual. I was too dogmatic, I guess, too rigid in my thinking, particularly in plan. I always, I liked plan because of its organization, but I liked section, but starting grad school, I was still heavy plan. As I mentioned, good ideas are not invented. So be at peace with having bad ideas, and just know that this is something that we do, and it's not so much coming up with ideas, but what we're tasked with is understanding the difference between a good idea and, let's say, a bad idea, and one that's not relevant for our project. I don't think that we come up with the good ideas. And so I think we have bad ideas, and we take the best bad idea we have, and we feel like, okay, I can go in this direction. And then we refine it over time. It's never about something that you're constantly coming up with. Matter of fact, all of my best ideas during my presentations were post-rationalized. And so I would give my presentation, and then, I would come up with my scheme, and then as I was thinking about how I'm doing the presentation, I would start making up things like, I intended to do this because this relates to something else. But it wasn't like I talked about them as if they were original ideas. Like whenever you see an architect's sketch of their building, and it's these few lines that just capture the essence of the building, and it makes it look like they're brilliant star architects, and this is how they do this napkin sketch and pass it on, and voila, you have a genius building. That's bullshit. Sorry, I guess I probably shouldn't. That's not real how it works. It's you do labor over things, and you reduce things down to making the project that essence. And so it almost seems like it's something that we can't capture, because we see it given off in this but this is a false presentation of how architecture is done and how architecture is perceived. As I said, we post-rationalize things. That's perfectly acceptable. You don't want to tell people that you're doing that, I don't think, but our mind is constantly, I think we're hardwired to constantly try to understand reality and reason things, and we try to reason our decisions to what we're doing. And so when you have an idea and you have a direction that you're going, a general direction of whether it's a courtyard building or trying to get back to nature, or it's a very internal building, whatever it is, each time you make a decision, if that's in the back of your mind's trying to connect the dots between these things. We're letting our mind come up, have these, in some ways, being suspended in this nebulous kind of, I don't know how to explain it. It's so hard to put in words. It's like, how do you get that point to have aha moments? How do you get this to put yourself in a position where you can have this light bulb go off? Sometimes it's happened in sleep with me. I've only had this happen a few times, but I've heard other architects and designers have this occur more often. But I've once have studied a problem in my 3553 studio. I couldn't figure out a layout for the third floor of a row house. And in a dream, I kid you not, I come up the stairs, I turn and look into the room, and everything was laid out for me already. And I woke up and it was like 2 or 3 in the morning. And I was like, I have to sketch this because I've been working on it for so long. So I went and sketched it out and not thinking too much of it, but just was like surprised that I had this in a dream. I went back to bed. When I got up in the morning, it was on point. I was so proud of that. I was like, I'm going to be such a good architect. Ideas are just going to come to me, and they haven't happened since. But I know it's possible. It can happen. I don't really get much inspiration in sleep now. I just get so tired, I pass out. But let the ideas, time away from designing, keeping the ideas in your mind and not constantly looking at something is just as important as time designing. I was just mentioning this last week. I was doing a project at my firm, and I laid out something in plan, and I couldn't quite figure out this organization. I did the best I could. I went home. I came back the next morning, and within 15 minutes of looking at it with my coffee, I realized how many things that I wasn't seeing the day before. Like, it seemed so obvious that this would just shift over, this comes down, and everything aligns. It's just everything falls into place. But sometimes we don't see it, and we think that if we spend more time working on it, we're going to discover it. But you need to separate yourself. You need time to sleep and come back to it and see it with fresh eyes. And so a lot of students think that if they work longer and longer on it, they'll figure out the solution. But trust that you need sleep and come back to it the next morning. Okay, I would also say start writing your idea out. We're not writers. We're actually not even good graphic designers, to be honest. But writing and presenting seems to be something that we put off to the end. We almost dread it. We want to show our project, but we don't want to do it. We spend so much time and effort putting into it, all of this emotion, and we feel like we've poured ourselves into something, and we don't want it to be critiqued because we almost feel like it's personal. I tell students to take it dispassionately, but it's really not, right? I mean, I try not to take it personal whenever I get critiqued, and because I know it's on design, but I still feel it that way to some degree, because I feel like this is a very emotive process. It's something that I believe in. So I want to get it right. And I'm okay with whenever it's critiqued in a good direction or whatever, or even a bad direction. I tend to know the difference, but I'm going on a tangent for that one. That's not even a part of this. So my point would be, whenever you write it down, ask yourself, is this something that you believe in? Is this a good direction? It might not be something that you just gung-ho about and think this is absolutely it, but getting it on paper, at least verbalizing it and writing it down, will help you always come back to making sure that it's the direction you want to go. Now, because you're just writing for yourself, you don't have to worry about grammar or structure or anything like this. Just write a few sentences just for yourself. Don't show them to anybody, and ask yourself, is this right? Is this the way that I'm going? I think a lot of times with design, it's about an active learning process. It's about actively questioning whether you're being consistent in your decisions and moving forward, because we're grabbing images from all over the place. And then it becomes sort of this hodgepodge about how we're aligning them and trying to make relationships and yada, yada. Writing it down will allow you to have that as a background to critique yourself in some ways. Now, you have to actually believe in the idea. And when you present it to somebody, this is one of the things that we don't do well with architecture students. You guys get up there and you talk about your project nervous-like, and I completely get it. I paced back and forth before every one of my graduate studios. I would have my own classmates telling me to sit down and just chill because I was so nervous. I wanted to say everything correctly. I went through extremes on this. Once I memorized an entire sheet of paper, which is a lot to do actually, of a presentation, word for word. And I was like, this is perfect. This is actually how I want to do it. I'm going to present it. I'm going to nail it. I get up there and I start presenting, and I'm on like the second sentence, and I forget a simple word, just one word out of the thing. And because I couldn't remember the word, the rest of the article completely went blank on me. I'm seriously, this is my first semester in graduate school. And I paused, and I could not for the life of me say anything else about my project. I couldn't even just talk about it without saying anything that I wrote. I just completely drew blank. And then being silent made my mind even more panicked, and I literally sat down. I just was like, I can't present, and I just sat down. It was incredibly embarrassing as a student. But I learned a lesson not to memorize what you're going to say. Make note cards and just talking points. Give yourself that freedom, because if you constrict it too much, you'll fall on your face, or at least I did. But when you do verbalize it, and this is your idea, this is the key. Say it with confidence, right? Say it like you want somebody else to believe it. Don't say it like you're unsure of the idea. If somebody says something to me, and whether it's a good idea or not, and they're unsure about it themselves, that leaves me little, I'm human, right? So I'm going to feed off of your disposition and how you're talking to me. And so if you say it with a good, like, certainty, even if it's a bad idea, I'm behind you. I'm backing you up, and I want to know how to help you carry this idea. But if you say it with some trepidation in your voice and you're kind of nervous about it, then it doesn't really instill a whole lot of confidence in what you're presenting. I'm going to circle back to confidence in presentation in a bit and talk to you guys about how to present, which is going to be something similar that you've already heard, but I'm going to add a few more things to it. Next would be ranking your ideas. And this is one of the things that I do with every one of my ideas. I find this is an easy way for me to be able to tell the difference between ideas. So I come up with something, and then I ask myself, on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being the best idea I've ever had, which is not a big scale, and 1 being awful, where do I rank this idea? I don't go forward with anything over a 5. I mean, anything under a 5. If it's 5 and under, and I be critical on myself because I want good work. If it's a good idea, and you have to ask yourself, is it relevant to my project? It might be a great idea, but it might not be relevant to what you're doing. That's a tricky one for students to be able to figure out. So this is why it helps to write down what your broad idea is, and then come back and question, does this fit within that? And if it doesn't, then just accept, okay, this is a good idea, but not for this project. I'm going to do this later, next semester, or next time I do something residential or whatever. Then if the idea is good enough, if it's like a 6, 7, 8, then I'll keep it and move forward. But I'm really critical of these on myself, and I don't move forward on ideas that I don't feel like are really strong. But all the ideas, when I first have them, I think, this is good, I can go with this. But I have to consciously say, is this on a 1 to 10, what would this be ranked as? And I imagine that somebody else is standing next to me who knows more than me and would be like, nah, that's not an 8. You know, that's not an 8. Like myself critiquing myself. Okay. Next one. So how do we become better designers? Well, travel is an easy one for me to say, but it seems a rather obvious one. I would say one of the cool things to do is pick a building somewhere else in the world, one that you just really are drawn to. For me, it was Firminy Chapel by Le Corbusier, which is in Firminy, France. And this actually was finished when I was in grad school. So it finished decades after Corbett died. And I was in my last year in grad school, and this came out on the cover of an architect magazine that I had. And I was completely in love with it. And I have been since. It's been a love affair. But having that as a destination to always go to was kind of nice. I finally got to see it a few years ago. I made a separate trip and took a couple of trains to Firminy to see this building. I was the only one in the building for like the first hour and a half when it opened, because I was there waiting for an hour before it opened. So I got to walk around and be inside of this chapel. It was a beautiful space to be in, but it was the most meaningful experience of actually visiting architecture for me. And in that sense, and one of the nice things about this building is it is completely the opposite of anything I would personally design. I could not think this way, or I don't think this way, and I don't design this way. So it was much more or less about me copying the building and me just enjoying the space and experiencing something that was completely out of my element from my own sensibilities as a designer. Find something like that and put it on your bucket list, and then keep that as a goal to eventually make a trip out to see something. It'll be really meaningful because it builds the anticipation of going to see this one piece of architecture. Even if it's not abroad and somewhere in the States, take a road trip, go see something. I picked this up when I was in grad school, and my professor one weekend took a plane and flew up to Kansas to go see Stephen Hall's museum edition. It's slipping my mind. The channel glass one that's looked like a box, Nelson Atkins. Okay. And he comes back and he talked about it. He started using this building during his critiques with us because he just went there. And I thought it was brilliant that somebody actually just took a plane to another state just to see one building and to come back. I'd never would have considered doing that. But it made an impression on me, and I've done it since. I pick a few buildings rather than just one, but I loved that idea. I loved that passion that it's like, I have to see this building. I can't just read about it, but I need to experience it as an architect. And that really instilled in me. I mean, that stayed with me. Okay. Every city you go to, whether you're traveling by yourself or with family, there's bound to be a museum or a campus are nice to go to, something significant. So anytime you travel, you can simply Google that city and significant architecture and find it. This is basically what I do whenever I take students on trips to other cities. I look up the architecture, and a lot of times you'll find the AIA chapter will list all of the buildings on there and give you directions and ways to get to it in hours. And so there's stuff out there that you can find for this. But don't simply look at the architecture. This is kind of like window shopping that you get to. You go through nice buildings and you just look at them and you're like, okay, this is a cool space. I remember this. And then you leave. You might remember one or two things, but that's about it. I suppose as a drawing teacher, I should tell you, you need to sketch the things and absorb them mostly. Not so much sketch them as perspectives, but analyze them, more like Kevin Salone's notational drawings. But what I would say, more than sketching, and I believe in sketching, all of that, is asking yourself when you're in a space that you like, how would you have done it? Or how would you, I guess more the better question is, would I have made the same decision? And look at something, especially something that you like, and ask yourself, would I have come up with that? Most of the time, 99% of the time, the answer is no for me. And so until I ask that question for some odd reason in my mind, then it sticks with me that now whatever they did has sort of come into my repertoire for design sensibilities. And so next time I'm designing something, I might think of that more so than just simply experiencing it and saying I like it. But I have to question how I would have done it, or if I would have made those same decisions. Because a lot of times my answer is no, because I'm telling you guys, oh, make alignments, draw these lines, carry them forward. And I have such a rigid way, or a limited way, I should say, of seeing architecture that whenever I see it done outside of my scope, it's refreshing to me. It's like it builds me as an architect, but I have to ask that question. And I'm thinking mainly at this point of the Museum of Fine Arts in Houston, Texas by Rafael Moneo, and looking in some of these spaces, some weird things and beautiful building, absolutely beautiful building and spaces and light. But standing in there and asking myself about how he did the skylights, if I would have ever come up with something like that. It's such a simple, like you look at it and you're like, okay, it's not like too creative, but it's really, to solidify that idea, I think was really not bold, enlightening to me. It just spoke to me for some reason on that day. And there's a lot of nice things about that building and spaces that I still recall whenever I do designs, because I sit there and try to question how I would have done it as an architect. Simply drawing it for some reason doesn't do that for me. And experiencing the architecture, just walking through, also doesn't do it for me. I have to sit there and ask questions about how I would have done it. Maybe that works for you, maybe not. Maybe you'll find your own way. But there's something to it that you can figure out. A lot of times when I look at these things, I realize I don't really have the courage to design the way that these other architects do. And I think that kind of builds me up thinking, maybe I can, maybe I could do something like that. All right, so as I mentioned, I looked at Meyer, my undergrad, almost exclusively, maybe too much. So whenever I moved on to Tonawanda, it was basically a mix of Ondo and Meyer. Matter of fact, I got critiqued on that quite a bit. I couldn't separate Meyer from how I was moving forward. But what I would recommend is picking one architect a semester. And you got a list of Pritzker Prize winning architects that you can pull from, or the AIA Gold Medal. There's a lot of names that you can choose from, but choose one firm or maybe an architect that we have a lot of books on in the library, aside from Korb, because you're going to get a lot of Korb. I would even say aside from Meyer, because you're going to get Meyer. But choose an architect that you're personally interested in, whose work that you want to do, or you think that's just inspiring. For instance, now if I was to pick one, it'd probably be Rex, which is Joshua Prince Ramos. And he's doing a lot of cool stuff that I think, man, I wish I was a part of that firm. I wish I was a part of that group. And so I would now look at their work. So each semester I picked one architect and I tried to look at all of their projects that they had done. So that one, I became more intimately aware of that architect and their projects. But two, I started to design like that architect. I tend to naturally, and I think we all do, pick up on habits that we want from other people or from things. And so if you find something that's consistent, like this is why I think it should be one architect, is because there's a consistent thread through all their work that you can pick up on. If it's several different architects, then you're grabbing a lot of things at once and you're making a hodgepodge, but you're not really finding a consistent strategy to how you're doing. And so each architect deals with certain things differently, whether it's the program or turning corners or glazing or light or whatever. And as long as you choose one that you like, you emulate it a bit. Don't undervalue that. Your mind naturally picks up on these things and they start to produce. Like an example, whenever I first started teaching the drawing class, we had a student in there who could sketch really well. His lines and the way that he made his lines were so, I found such joy just looking at how he made lines, not even the overall image that he made. And I noticed that next time I started sketching, and for a while after, I would start emulating those. I was starting to draw more like the other student. And there's been a lot of students that have gone through the drawing class that have influenced me in that regard. And so we just naturally pick up on these things, whether we consciously or unconsciously want to, they happen. And so be consistent in which architect that you look at. I had a professor in grad school, first day of class, give us a pop quiz, and he asked us to name any Pritzker Prize winning architect that we knew of, and then to list any project that we could list from the architect. I think it was a point to show us all that we absolutely knew nothing about architecture or any famous architects. I could probably list at the time, I think maybe 4 or 5, and then maybe 2 or 3 projects of one architect, right? But I realized how limited my understanding of this was. And this was my first semester in grad school, and this is actually what started the idea of I need to research these. I should know who these architects are, and I should be aware of their work context. I'm just so limited to Meyer at this point, and that's why I started moving on from it. All right, I'll kind of pick it up. Then study them, not just their 3-dimensional images, but look at their plans and sections. That's really where you're going to learn from. And print those off and set those down to you when you draw yours. That's key. Look at their floor thicknesses, look at their gallery spaces, look at their lighting, but you need their orthographic drawings next to yours as you draw them. The 3D images, that's great. That's going to appeal you. That's going to pull you towards them. But their technical drawings, their orthographic drawings, those are the ones that you want to have. Okay? Don't underestimate that. All right, top habits. If you have my studio, you've heard this. Design in section. Always section. Start with section. You lose the organization anxiety that, oh, I need to get these things aligned in parallel walls and I'm drawing lines from context, whatever. In section, you're thinking about the largest programmatic elements and you're relating them. You're relating an experience. You're giving an impression with your first things of section. And so always start your projects in section. It never fails. Most times students will start with, okay, I need to design this. Where's my context? And I'm going to pull regulating lines and I'm just going to make my building form however these lines cross. It's not a good strategy to use. Start in section, figure out what the idea of the building is, and then you can think about its organization. It doesn't matter whether it's urban or rural, or anything. If it's, look for context, whether that's physical context, if it's an urban, or if it's not, then you have the sky and you have the ground plane and you have the horizon. If you have one tree on your property, that's your context. Look for things that become something that you can relate to in that regard. Now, a few things to remember always when you're setting up sections and plans is hierarchy. It seems so obvious, but students, this is where it comes, where I think students should make a checklist. So you write these things down and then you ask yourself, am I doing it? And most of the time you're not. And so if you can question it, if you have it written down, do I have hierarchy in section? And you look at your section and the pancake floors, the answer is no. Then it's like, okay, well, how do I make it? I need to make a double volume space. And so you start to. So hierarchy in space, that happens in section and in plan. You need to have things that attract the eye, that the eye can rest on. If everything is so complex, if everything's doing something, the eye doesn't know how to read the drawings or how to read the design. So think of hierarchy, that brings clarity to what you're doing. That's going to be in space, and that also when you get to facades, and I'm not going to talk a lot about facades or at all, but in facades, it also becomes hierarchy as well. And so you need that with your structural members and everything that happens on your facade. You need to have something that gives a scale to it. And this becomes particularly important when you build basswood models. Buy multiple size pieces so that you have really thin ones versus kind of thicker, medium ones and thicker ones. This sort of Goldilocks spectrum of basswood. That way your project has a scale to it. The smaller pieces really do a lot for moving forward. I'm talking about that 8,000, that little handrail basswood piece that you got, the one that sucks the glue together. That one really helps for your project. Just pulling it off of something gives a nice little detail to it. So don't underestimate the details in that sense. Now, for your overall design project, think of it like this. It's a balance between simplicity and complexity. Simplicity means that I want you to start your designs by coming up with a very simple composition. The complexity comes with the materials and the facade and the details, the subtleties about how you take a facade and you shift it slightly. You don't need to do much to a facade to really give it some depth. So if you try to design, if you sit down, and I struggled with this for years when I was an undergrad. I wanted to design the most complex building so that everyone would think I'm just this brilliant architect. And I would run in circles because I couldn't design the complexity of it. Start with simplicity, make sure the plan works, and you have your hierarchy of spaces so everything seems organization-wise correct. Then move to the complexity. Then start shifting things, making room a little bit bigger or adding a facade detail to it. But don't start with sitting down thinking I'm going to make a really complex building. You will come up with something that will be a disappointment. But if you make a very simple building, then you can push the complexity into it as you move forward, and all of the simplicity and organization, which is mostly circulation that you're dealing with, is already resolved for you. So keep that in mind. Start with simplicity and then build it up. Broad stroke first. So as you design, everything is sort of additive. So you take your programs and you're sort of laying them out, and everything is just coming in as additive to it. Okay, I need 7 offices. Okay, I need a conference room. I need some restrooms, and you're just adding everything. Once you get that on there and you build a massing model, start subtracting. Start pulling voids from it. The subtractive process is what's really going to make those are the moments on architecture where I look at students' projects and I think, wow, that's a really nice space. It's because it's subtractive. Students rarely add something physically that I think, wow, that's really nice. The facades will get there, but the subtractive ideas, this is where I push in section and carving out of the earth. Those are the things that make the spaces unique to them. So I think of it like this. I was hiking once in Big Bend, and we were coming a long trail at the end of it. And we leave the trail and we're walking through this little river that's or a valley, kind of creek at this point. And they needed steps inside of it. Instead of adding steps, they carved them from the stone that was there. So this poor construction crew was out there chiseling away at all these steps into the side of the mountain. And there was something that seemed so attractive about this idea, this subtractive steps that seemed to have this permanence to them. They had this longevity, like they had already been there. They had this timelessness to them, like they've been eroded. Maybe that's it also, like subtractive things have this sense of erosion, like this a lot of time and duration has passed. Additive things just seem that they're just additive. And so there's something that we naturally gravitate towards about subtractive ideas that are paramount. So look for those opportunities and subtract things from your design project. You'll be surprised how simple moves, taking one room completely from your program and pulling it off, and look at the form and see how the spaces revolve around it. You won't think, oh, this would be a better space if I remove this form. You just need to arbitrarily pick something, pull off of it, off the model. And this happens in digital models pretty easy because you can group things and hide them, and then see what it looks like. Let yourself see your project differently than how you would have intentionally designed it. So think of it more like an unintentional design and then critique it. You will have much better success for your aesthetics overall if it follows more of the unintentional part of it, I assure you. All right, final presentation. At the end of the semester when I was a student, I always set my own schedule, regardless of what the professor gave me. I know I should tell you to listen to your professor. Yeah. But set your own schedule. You know as well how good your work. You need to adhere to it. And you need to be disciplined for this. But map out what you want to get accomplished every day. I set calendars for the last 2 weeks, and I had written in every day something that I was going to accomplish. And I made sure that before I went to sleep, I finished it that day. Stay on schedule. You will be able to complete your projects. I find it inexcusable for students to present a project that's incomplete. That doesn't deal with your ability to be a designer. That talks about your it talks about your inability to schedule yourself. It's really simple. And so I started always a week ahead of everyone else because I was doing things differently. I was drawing by hand, and so I knew it would take me a little bit longer, but I always finished, and I always slept the night before, and I had my things carried off, and it never was hard for me. I rarely pulled on all-nighters too. If you can plan it out, think of it like this. This is your own process, what you want to get it done, and just follow it. I think you have to have discipline to do this, but this worked well for me, and I didn't come up with this idea. I had this from another student when I was in undergrad, who we were in our senior design, and he was, I would say, one of the top students in our class, easily. And he had talked about how he never pulled an all-nighter his whole career. And we were all just shocked by that. We couldn't believe it. And we were right. He goes home at 9 o'clock every night, but he would come in at like 6 in the morning and start working. He knew those hours were really good for him working. And so I started picking up on that. And I was like, well, shit, I don't get much done at night either. I socialize and I go through this laughing hysteria for 2 hours whenever we're all exhausted. And, you know, there's a lot of fun things that happen at night in the architecture building that you don't ever forget or want to tell your professors about. But working in the morning worked best for me as it worked best for him. And I didn't pull many all-nighters in grad school. Unless I had other things outside of the school that dictated I needed my attention. All right, but on your presentation, bring a level of enthusiasm to this. So if you get up there and you have a mediocre project, but you are just in love with this and you're talking about it and you're so passionate about what you've done, that arouses something in the other people. We're only human. We're not sit there as these sort of cold figures. And so if you show me this enthusiasm, it makes me want to be, it's contagious. And so your presentation, your disposition, how you present can sell a bad idea. You could have I've seen this happen in school when I was in grad school. And there was a guy in our class who never did anything. And, you know, we all worked as hard as we could. And it came time for his presentation, and he had like 3 pages. And we have all these plans and sections. I mean, he had crap. He just clearly did it 2 hours before. And he gets up there and we all gathered around. I remember thinking, this guy's about to get ripped open. We're ready for this. We're like, finally, do justice. And he was so enthusiastic about his 3 pieces of paper and his idea that all the professors gave him a pass. They were enthusiastic for him about him doing the work eventually. I mean, they said, you know, you need to do more than this, but that was about it. It was a slap on the wrist. And I was like, you got to be kidding me. All you have to do is just act like you're selling a good idea. I mean, I always found the confidence in the work, not so much in anything else. And so it dawned on me that your presentation can have a tremendous effect on how other people perceive your project. And I see this all the times. And I know I was this way. And I feel like if somebody told me this when I was in school, I probably still wouldn't have been able to not be nervous. But we're not there to really, it's not like I sit down or any of us sit down and think we're just going to drill these students. We sit down and we think, how can we help you? And if you can just be clear about what you've done and you're enthusiastic about it, it will help us just sort of talk about those points. Now, what we talk about is what you talk about. And so this is where it comes kind of, you got to be clever about how you present your project. Only talk about your good ideas. First of all, don't ever get up there and say, apologize. Okay. It's like going on a date, first date, and apologizing. Right? It's not setting the best impression. You don't go on a first date and immediately start talking about all of your insecurities or all the things you've done wrong. You go on there and you talk about yourself, really, and you talk about the good things. And so that's what you should do with your project. If there's parts of your project that are unresolved or not very good, don't even mention them, right? Only talk about the good stuff, and then you will be critiqued on the good stuff. And if they want to talk about the other stuff, they'll search it out and find it, but you don't need to call attention to it. Don't ever say what you're missing, and don't ever critique your own project. Don't ever say anything negative about it. It starts off by, it gives the wrong impression about your presenting your work. It's a habit. And we say these things because, we know I'm missing this and I wish I had it. And I'm just saying it so, it's out in the open. I get that. I feel the same way whenever I present work. I want to kind of call these things out, but don't. Fight the urge and only talk about the positive things that you've done and the big ideas about the project. Don't be unnecessarily wordy and just go on. A lot of times students will finish their project and they'll stop, and then no one will say something for like 2 or 3 seconds, and the student will just start picking up again. And then we're sitting there for another 6 minutes with them drooling on about things that they've had their whole presentation, which was great. And then they got nervous and just started talking. So when you're done, just button up and stand back. And that's cool. I would say the presentation is equal part content, equal part imagery. I'd say that kind of unfortunately, but imagery is what you get to a board and you scan the room and you look around and you think, which one's capturing my eye, right? And so the imagery plays a part into it. And then the delivery and attitude. And so hype yourself up if you need to, but be enthusiastic about it. Just seem like you're overwhelmingly excited about what you're presenting. It goes a long ways. Okay, it keeps them interested. Okay, next page. Ask yourself before you present, how am I standing out? This is a competitive field. All of your classmates are presenting the same project. So what are you doing specifically that's going to make your project stand out? Not about how you're dressing for the presentation, not necessarily about maybe the images, but everyone has the same required images. It's not the content that's going to stand out from it. It might, depending on your project. But whenever I was a student, I noticed that I drew a lot. And I had tons of yellow trace paper. And when I realized this, most of my trace was context. And so I would sit down and I would draw all the context first, and then I would draw a plan. And every one of my plans, so if I had a 4-story building, I had 4 sheets with all context carefully drawn. I would draw the context and I would hatch them in. And I would spend 5 or 6 minutes drawing the context before I started drawing anything else. This was a little thing, but it filled my trace paper. I just had rolls of trace paper by the time I graduated. It just filled drawings. And it's because most of it was the busy work of me filling in the space before I start doing my design. And I realized that if I spent a lot of time working on context, depending on what stage I was at the design, I spent more time thinking about what it was that I was designing because I already put the context on there. I didn't want to redraw it, but I did anyways. And so this was my junior year in Boswell studio, that I had so much trace paper that I filled up those big white roller boards that you see on the second floor. I filled up 2 of them just completely with trace, and then I did all of my renderings next to it. I had at 3 or 4 times the size of presentation as anyone else at the end of the semester. And I pinned all of my trace up because I wanted them to see all of the work that went into it. I didn't even talk about the trace. I talked about just the last images that were for the presentation. But having all that trace behind me, all of that work, gave me the confidence that the work's there. They see the impression and all the effort that I put into this project. And it was commented on, it was well received. I started layering it a little bit more, not quite taking so big of a space as I moved on from that. But I had something that nobody else had. I had this gigantic impression of all the process that I've put into this. And so think about what you're presenting, what makes you stand out amongst everybody else. If you're not thinking about that, you'll never really be able to stand out. You have to actively push this measure. You might come to the resolution that you don't have anything, you're standing out on this project, and okay. But next time, make it a point to have something. Like, be honest with yourself, but be active. Okay, if you don't have a whole lot of hand drawings, which you should, but if you don't, then whenever you're setting up your digital models, because we spend a lot of time making digital models, and it doesn't look all that effort that we put into it. You could spend 2 days working on a model, and then you show 2 images, right? And it looks like it just cranked it out. So go through the effort as you're making this to, especially whatever program you're using, set up a scene and then screen capture. So you start every hour, screen capture where you're at, so that you could at least take these later on if you want, JPEGs or whatever, and you can make a grid that will show your process. Students don't capitalize on showing the process for your digital models. You just show us the incomplete. I know how long they take. They take forever. And you don't get a whole lot of credit out of it. That's why when some, kid fills 2 boards with trace paper, they look like they've done more work than you, because they have physical copies to show for it. And so if you're working predominantly digital, you should be working both, but if you work predominantly digital, do yourself a favor and set up the model in a certain way and show all of the iterations that you're coming up with. Even if you don't talk about them, you need to show the process of how long are the iterations that you've taken to come to this. It will help you in the end, even if they're just small, like real small, and you just make a grid of like 30 of them, which wouldn't be hard. One model could easily produce 30 images if you just think about it. And so that will go a long ways for your presentation. It will start to be something more that you're showing that nobody else is showing. Okay, so try to address all of the best ideas during your presentation. You want to limit what you talk about. That's key. And I would say in a lot of ways, it's kind of like manipulating. You're controlling the conversation by only talking about the things you want them to talk about. I know you want to talk about everything that you've done. I know you spend a lot of time thinking about all of your decisions that you've done in the model, and you want to talk about them, right? 16 weeks, I get it. I really do. But it's not, it loses that more is less. I mean, less is more. If you talk too much, you lose the essence of what you're trying to capture. And you want to kind of keep them wanting more. If you tell everything, it's like, okay, I get it. And I see everything that you want me to see. But if you leave me where I'm wanting to know more, I might ask for it, but I will always have this longing towards the project of understanding it. And that's what you want to instill. You want to get the other person where they want to know more about it. And so that's not telling them everything. That's just focusing what you want to do. Now, one of the questions I get with students is defend or not to defend. And so if a professor critiques something that you've done, do you defend your idea? Do you defend your design? Or do you just, as some people think, just shut up and take their critique? I wouldn't say shut up, but I would say I'm on the fence about this one. It depends on how passionate you are about whatever critique you get, think about it from their perspective. Think about it from a different perspective than how you've rationalized the design. We all come up with a project that we rationalize to ourselves, that makes sense to ourselves. And so when somebody else doesn't see it, we're like, well, they just don't get it. That's not quite the case. We're limited in how we understand things. And so try to see it from their perspective, try to understand it. And the best way to challenge a professor is to ask them questions, to get them to elaborate more on what they're saying. And then you'll be able to tell whether they have merit to their idea, professor or critique or whatever, but it's also a very respectful way of trying to get more information out of them. So ask questions of it. That's probably the best way. But, and I have to say this because I felt this way when I was a student, I defended my work. Especially, I did not care. I didn't care what they said. I stood my ground and I defended my work. Even I would acknowledge the criticism, but I would also acknowledge that this is the direction that I chose to go, and this was my narrative from the beginning. Sometimes that wasn't entirely true. That was post-rationalized, but I still maintained it. And I liked the sort of be challenged and to challenge back. That may not be for everyone, but I think that if you're passionate about what you're doing, don't be submissive. Defend it. Defend it with an open mind. And you don't necessarily have to defend it as in you're right and they're wrong, but defend it as in this is my perspective on it, and I see your perspective. I acknowledge your perspective. But I still think defend it. Okay, does my professor like my design? No. Actually, what we like, or what I like, I can only speak for myself, is your enthusiasm. And so if I come to your desk and you have I see all the effort that you're putting into it. As a designer, I don't know how to say this. It motivates me. Like, it makes me want to help you. Whenever I see somebody that draws one or two things and they are asking, well, should I do this or should I go that way? I don't know. I'm less likely to help you with that because you're not taking any initiative on your own. It's not that I don't want to help you, but I could tell you which direction I would do, but I'm not you. And I think design is incredibly personal. And so I think also that being a good designer is about having confidence. And so you have to try things that you're uneasy about doing. You have to take risks and then see how they unfold. And if that risk plays out, you're confident you made the right decision. If it doesn't, you're confident not to make that decision again. And so either way, you learn from it. That seems obvious, but a lot of times students will want to be baby stepped through a project and they'll want to know, I didn't go forward because I wanted to get your opinion on it. Wrong. That's bullshit. You push that design and you say, this is the way I had this crazy idea last night and I pushed it all the way to this point, and then this is where I was starting from. And then talk to me or talk to whoever, your professor, about your comparison between the two ideas. What's good about one and what's good about the other. And then we can have a conversation about which one seems more appropriate for your project. But I want to see, or we want to see, your own initiative to it. If you can bring something to the table that you're going above and beyond for your design, that inspires us, because that's what we want out of you. We want you to be successful, but we also, more importantly, want you to learn how to think and how to be autonomous and push your own designs. We'll help you with the critique and the proportions and all of that, and the programmatic requirements. But the attitude of, I wanted to get your opinion on it first, it doesn't play well. It's not, I don't hear that and think, oh, that's sweet, they just want my opinion. I think, man, they missed an opportunity. They missed the opportunity to become a designer on their own strength, on their own merits. And so anytime you're wondering whether you should do it or not, sketch it out. It will never evolve into it. You most likely, maybe you'll sketch it out, and maybe 20% of the time it'll run a tangent and you'll go a different direction with whatever it is that your problem you're trying to solve, for the better, for a direction you weren't thinking about. So that's what I mean by, if you're open to the idea of this going in any direction, all possibilities, sketching these things out stops you from thinking of it as a tunnel vision, as this is the only way to go. And it just opens your mind up to seeing things in other ways. It might feel like you've wasted a couple of hours or 12 hours doing one direction that you're not moving forward with. You didn't waste it. You use that to learn from. You have to appreciate, for every drawing that you guys have seen that I've done, there's 5 or 6 that you haven't seen. Most of my stuff I don't show because it's just incomplete or processed, unsuccessful, misproportioned, whatever. But I consider those like the foundation of getting all of the other drawings. I have to go through every bad idea I have before I can find my good one. Or else I'm unsure about the good one. I have to exhaust every idea, which can be exhausting. Okay, and next. Okay, why architecture? That's got to be a personal one. I randomly fell into it. I didn't choose architecture because I wanted to be an architect. A friend of mine had wrote me saying that he wanted to be an architect whenever he was graduating high school. I thought I was going to go into the Marines, to be honest. College wasn't for me. I graduated in a class of 800 students, and I wasn't even in the top half whenever I graduated. I just didn't apply myself in school. I had other things, I guess, that I don't know why I didn't, to be honest. I think it just, well, that's a whole nother conversation. So I fell into it. I started reading the catalog and I thought, architecture, it's in the A's. All right, I'll do that. That's what my friend said. That seems, I like drawing, so there's something about it. I didn't do well in high school. So when I started college, I thought, a fresh chance to start over at a GPA, I'm going to really take this seriously. And so I worked my ass off my whole college. But starting off, it felt like a big jump between high school and college because I wanted to do better. I wanted that 4.0 like we all do. And so I do my first semester. I had all of my core classes and everything. No 4.0. Next semester, no 4.0. Next semester, no 4.0. It just wasn't attainable for me. But I worked hard for everything that I did. And it wasn't until my third year that it really clicked that I was like, okay, now I'm going to be an architect. Now I'm going to take this seriously. So even if you start working hard and taking your studies seriously, that might not click for you for a couple of years. It didn't for me. I'm a pretty slow learner and I'm dense, but if you're passionate about it, just keep pushing forward with it. And then one time you'll get the right professor, you'll get the right project, it'll be the right time in your life, and you'll just pour yourself into it. And then all of a sudden it won't even feel like work anymore. It'll just feel like this labor of love. It'll be exhausting still, don't get me wrong, full of anxiety and full of insecurities and all of that, but it'll pay off. It'll make it feel like you're not really working, but it's this drive, your own passion that's pushing it forward. Ask yourself what kind of architect you want to be when you graduate. If you're fine with just sort of being a part of the process and, having a building kind of come through, somebody else design it, and then you kind of do some CAD drawings for it, and then move on to somebody else in post-production and construction administration, then okay. Then you're just, you probably don't have to apply yourself too much, I guess. If you're wanting to be a designer, the best advice I can give you is that the only designers that I see, and I don't have a big scope of designers in the professional world, but the ones that I do know of all draw by hand. This isn't a coincidence, but they all enjoy drawing. And you can enjoy drawing and not be very good at it. You don't have to draw pretty pictures to be excellent at drawing architecture. Matter of fact, I find the two, orthographic drawing and then renderings, completely separate in the thinking process for whenever I'm doing drawings. So draw constantly because your mind thinks differently. This is where your mind gives you those aha moments. The computer, you can have them, and I design on the computer. I design quick ideas on the computer, but I'm always coming back to section, and I'm always drawing just small like vignettes of sections of spaces, not the whole building, but like what's this space relating to this? How does the ground work with this? And how does the structure come into it? And I'm designing in that way. And then plan sometimes about organization, but I also find that I can organize things in plan in a computer sometimes better. I think that the amount of effort you put into your education while you're a student is proportionate to how successful you're going to be when you get out. I think that's a general application to it. There's always exceptions, but it's more about the work ethic, not the grades that you get, not the type of project you have, but the work ethic. And people see through that. And so people see that when they hire. They want to hire somebody who's enthusiastic about doing things. And so if you want to be a designer, one, I think you need to start drawing more constantly. Draw all the time. But two, you have to keep in mind that designers are the very few percentage of people that graduate. You're not, well, one, your internship, you're just going to have to do, you get thrown into it. You're not designing, you're a part of a larger scheme, and it's great for your internship. You learn the process of a firm and how things work and all that. So that's good. But when you start working, and after you get through your internship and you start taking your exams, be active and telling your firm about where you want to go. Your firm will not just naturally promote you. If you want to go and be a part of the design or in a different sector of your firm, you have to stand up and tell them, this is what I want. They may not move you immediately, but if they want to retain you, that's in the back of their mind, and you will eventually be moved or go to another firm. But if you want to be a designer, you need to set that up and start challenging yourself on everything that you do. More so, like you have to rise to the occasion. You have to think that there's 15 other people in your class, and you need to have the top 1 or 2 projects up there. You may not always get it, and that's cool, but you need to strive for it. You need to really make a genuine effort so that at the end of the semester, there's nothing more you could have done. There wasn't anything that you could have done better for your project. And if you get to that point, you will feel confident about it. And then the next semester, if you do the same thing and you have a better project, you will see yourself grow. And this is the crucial aspect of being a student. Once you see your growth, once you see that confidence starting to build, it can become exponential. Not confident that you'll have a good, not confident that you're a good designer, because you never really feel like that. More confident that whatever project, whatever thing you work on, given enough time and attention, you can make something good out of it. You can develop something, you can evolve it into something. If you think that you're a good designer, you're probably not. You have to sort of think that I'm a bad designer and I'm going to find my ideas. I think it's just a different way of approaching it. I'm not saying anyone in here is a bad designer, but, or maybe I am. So good luck with that. Almost done. Last one, final thoughts. So as a recap, these are things that I think you should make a checklist and ask yourself if you're doing them. These are sort of the successful habits. I wrote that there are 37 successful habits. I was just making that up. I don't have 37. But I'm going to give you some of the things that I've found from students along the way and also that I've pulled from personal experience. One, and this is a little bit of a recap, design with an open book in your lap. I think this is crucial. You're constantly aware that there are other things that you're looking at and that you need to try to put into your work. Anytime you come to a spot where you're not designing something or you're hitting a block, stop and look through images and flip through them. Flood yourself with images. Find inspiration in what you're doing and hold yourself accountable for it. It's an active process. We find so much, you notice how often we become regressive and falling back into patterns that we are not actively pursuing things. You have to actively pursuing being a better designer and pushing design in your project. If you just sit down and start working on a project, not much is really going to happen. You might get a little bit more organization, but if you sit down and tell yourself what you're about to do and actively pursue it, it makes a huge difference. It's that sort of power of positive thinking. That was the crave in the 70s. So next is the inspiration. Create subfolders or digital folders of inspirational ideas. This is also great for whenever you start a new project to go back through those and flip through them all kind of quickly, not spending too much time on it. This is more like window shopping, just to kind of get this, oh yeah, this is the type of project that I'm working. These are the ideas that I kind of like. And it just kind of builds something inside of you. I think that that's like the best way for me to start a process is I have to see images, I have to flood myself with them, and then I can start drawing. Otherwise, I start drawing boxes next to boxes, and there's not a whole lot of creativity to it. But if I go through images, then it's like, oh yeah, this is what I'm after. This is what I'm trying to do. Rate your ideas. Again, 1 to 10. How good are those ideas? And then, is it appropriate for my project? Design in section first. I can't stress that one enough. I absolutely cannot. That's the best advice I feel like I give any student. Start in section. Start with what you think whenever you get the program, what's the best, what's the biggest, or what programmatic element are you most interested in? Doesn't have to be the largest. Generally it is. But what's the most one that you're interested in? Start with that and then think what's next to that. What's above that? What's below that? And it just becomes radial. And so you start with that idea and then develop it further. But start in section, please. I can tell and plan how good of a student is for architect, but in section, that's where it's most revealing. You cannot lie in your section. I can always tell when a student isn't very good through their section and when a student is exceptional through their section. That's the telltale sign that tells how well you're thinking about your project. Section is more like the Rubik's Cube kind of architecture. It's a little bit more complicated spatially. Not even that. I don't think so. I think plan's harder to do than section, but start in section. That's where the money's at. That's where the essence of your architecture is going to be. So draw, draw, draw. There was a great quote by Michelangelo on his deathbed to one of his last apprentices, Antonio. It says, draw, Antonio, draw. Draw and don't waste time. And this kind of struck me because this was a man who was in his late 80s, and this was his last advice was, constantly draw. He spent a lifetime doing it, mastered it by the age of 12, really. And this was still his parting advice. That always stuck with me. When you give a presentation, ask yourself, there's only 5 more. What can I do that's different from everybody else? How does my work stand out? How is mine going to be memorable? Content is one way of doing it, yes, but it's not just what you're presenting. It's how you're presenting, yes, but it's the breadth of what you're presenting and the creativeness to it. Most people just, oh, it's time to pin up. I got to pin up I'll pin up my sketches that I did. And I made a couple of prints of my digital model. I'll pin that up. But it's never like, this is what I'm putting that nobody else is. I'm going to set up this order of my process. That's going to be, imagine if a student came up to me or had a presentation and they're like, this is my model. And then there was a grid, a 10 by 10 grid of their project just evolving over time, or different iterations. Even if it was a 10 by 10 grid and I didn't understand what it was evolving from one thing, just that impression alone would be memorable to me, that they're trying to show me something on this. And so grids are great for organizing things so that we understand the complexity of something that we're looking at, but set yourself up for these things. Actively search them out. They're not just going to happen. You won't just think of this the night before. You have to plan for it. But when your professors go to a bar later that night and they start talking about the projects, I assure you, we talk about this stuff. We mention, most of how we identify you guys is with your project or your presentation. What was that student's name? The one that did that thing, and we talk about it like that. And so set up your presentations to be memorable, not just for professors, but for anyone, especially when you get out in the professional world. Okay. Set a realistic schedule. That's going to be a key one for the end. Absolutely have no patience for not finishing your project. You should all finish every project that you do, all of the drawings, all of the models, and more by the final presentation. Even if your professor is not very good at planning these things out and gives you 4 days to throw in your final presentation, you need to plan out 2 weeks ahead that I'm stopping this and I'm starting my presentation. This is your education. You paid for it. You need to make sure that at the end, you have everything that shows all the effort that you've done in this semester. I've had not many, but few really talented students that just could not complete their work. And it's a shame because they're just bad planners, not bad architects or designers. And so get in the habit of that. Architecture, you will meet so many damn deadlines when you get in the real world. It's ridiculous. And if you can build up knowing that you can hit every deadline as you went through school, you're not going to really have a whole lot of anxiety and pressure when you hit the real world. You'll plan for these things and you'll be able to sequence them out. But we're constantly, deadlines damn near every day. So schedule's incredible. And don't underestimate how long things are going to take. Sort of build in a factor of like, this might take me 4 hours, give it 6 or 7, right? Avoid all-nighters. I think this is an interesting one. I like the camaraderie that you guys get from doing all-nighters, but try to avoid them. You don't really, you can do it for the social aspect of it, and maybe you can work on doing some production part of your project. But by and large, when designing, you don't get a whole lot of headway doing all-nighters. And so if you need to do production, save that for those moments. Otherwise, don't try to design all the way through the night. Your mind needs to be rested, and you need to look at something fresh to really have good ideas. You can't force design. I wish. Okay, draw on your study models. Every time you make a study model, draw on top of it. Draw all of your ideas on top of it as you're moving forward. This just makes better looking study models, and it gets all of your ideas out on something, and so that you see it moving forward. Show enthusiasm and energy during your presentation. You got to fake it till you make it. You may not be confident at all in your project, but act like you are and give that impression. It goes a long ways, I assure you. Design simple to complex, broad strokes, simple composition, and then push and pull the complexity of the project to make it whatever you want. However much you want to flex your muscles as a designer, go for it. But in the beginning, nail down the circulation and the spaces first. Very simple design, box-like, and then you can develop the complexity. And last, trust your instinct. We design on 2 fronts, intuition and analysis. And so your mind sort of shifts left and right, your brain, right? And how you're thinking about stuff. And so Design with intuition. This is where we get the faint idea about where we're going. And then when we start doing plan, that's when you start to get more of the analysis and the right side of your brain going off. Trust your instincts, take risks, and see how it works out. It sucks taking risks because you want to get it right. And you'd rather get it right than take the risk and get it wrong. I feel you. But take the risk, go out on a limb, and see where it heads you. You will learn something from it. Most often than not, you'll be like, it was the right choice. I could have done it a little bit better. Rarely will you think it was just the wrong choice. I shouldn't have done it at all, but you still learn not to go that direction. So you'll learn something from it, but you need to be open to putting yourself out there and trust your individualism. That's one of the best things about UTA is that we have such a diversity of students that come through. You each are pulling something from your life experience, from where the homes that you lived, from the houses that your parents or mother's house that you visited as a child, the smells and scents, the door handles, everything. All of your experiences as an adult, limited as an adult, right? All of these things shape how you see design. And a lot of times students undervalue that meaning and value in their work. And so you each bring something unique to the table. You have to learn how, not so much to exploit it, but to how to let that show through. Once you start designing as a genuine person, without being self-conscious that, I grew up and, lower middle class and nothing really eventful happened or didn't really have much, use that to your advantage. I'm more or less describing myself at that point. And so what did I learn from those things? How does that shape me as a designer? We all pull from life experiences in that regard. Traveling is the best thing that you can possibly do, not just to be as an architect, but as a person. Experience other cultures and experience, just go out and be, try to be present in the moment. Live life and try to learn something from everyone you encounter. I could ramble on further, but I'm going to stop here. So I'm going to read quickly these questions. It says, you mentioned Richard Meyer and Taro Ando. Yes. I don't know where you can find the recording. There you go. No questions for me. Do you guys have any questions? I'm happy to answer anything. And I'll try to keep my responses brief.
While we're waiting for possible questions to come in, I just want to say thanks again so much for coming and speaking. That was an awesome lecture. I really thoroughly enjoyed it and took lots of notes. But it's great hearing from you again and hearing all of these different ideas and the main core principles and things you used in school, and some stories to go along with that, funny or serious, are very helpful. It's inspiring and everything with school and my project I'm working on now, and looking back on previous semesters and future semesters. So thank you for coming again from camp and from CAPPA.
Oh, you're welcome. Of course, it was my pleasure. So from Ryan Lee, it says, how long are the projects for designers at your firm? If you mean how long do we get to design on them, it's a very limited window. They don't give us a whole lot. Maybe it's like 3 weeks in pre-design, which is making sure that what they call scope to budget. I'll be brief on this. It's seeing how all the program fits to make sure that the square footage is right. And then once you get approval for that, you move into the schematic design. That takes about 3 weeks or so. But most of the time what happens is all of the other bureaucratic stuff that goes along with getting a project done gets put on hold. And there's other people, mostly your consultants, that are also having to produce drawings to go along with these things, or behind schedule. And so by the time it gets to doing schematic, the schedule has to be, and so far in each project that I've worked on, has larger projects, has been reduced down. So they always cut time out of the design section of it because they need the effort, they need the hours that they've dedicated for the construction documents. And so the design part always gets reduced. And that depends on the firm that you're working at. So the firm I'm working at is not considered really a design firm. I'm a design department. It's me and the design director. And so, but it's a 180 person firm. And so we're really the only two that are doing the design work that comes through every project. We're trying to build that out of it. Other firms like Perkins and will dedicate a little bit more time to design, and will keep that time because they're known for doing design. Same with OmniPlan, but Perkins and will. When it comes to terrible conceptual designs, is there a possibility that those ideas can be revitalized in future projects? Yes. And so again, I wouldn't necessarily say they're terrible. They're just, some are not appropriate for it, and some are really not like strong ideas. And so, but absolutely, I've had ideas where I thought I really like this, but I'm forcing it in a project or in a program that it's not appropriate for, and this would be better at a different scale. And so this is one of those things where it kind of helps you, because you don't have to concede that you're not doing it. You get to say, okay, I get to put this in my back pocket and come back to it later on. As we are learning, studying online, what suggestions do you have for students to better deliver their ideas and presentations? What are the things that students should pay more attention to and to avoid? Well, so far, my experience, I've taught one studio over the summer that was completely online. And I thought that students presenting online tended to do better than in person, because you had a chance to actually set up a presentation on the computer and you were aware of it. You got to see it before it happened. Otherwise, students just wing it when they get up there to present. I mean, you make note cards, but you still feel like you're just winging it, right? In terms of what to pay attention to or avoid, I don't know. I haven't had too many presentations online, but the ones that I have had have been pretty successful. I had a good group over the summer. It was a graduate studio, Path A, and they were really strong students. I mean, that's a good question. I wish I had a better answer for it. I wish I had an answer for it. You guys are going to do great this semester. It's a little weird, I have to say. I mean, I'm meeting with my students half the time on campus. I think there's some advantages to being able to work like this. I think it helps depending on how you sequence the course, but I miss kind of being in studio with everyone, seeing all of the energy in the building and passing by everyone in the hallways. I always liked that. So take advantage of this opportunity. The unfortunate part is that, so I've learned a lot from how to deliver and how to teach from being online. And I think you guys should also try to look at what you can learn and think differently being online versus being in class. I've had to be direct about how I'm going to do it. You guys can just be more speculative, but I think maybe looking and finding more programs that you can learn, but probably better images, finding better sites for inspiration. I think maybe that's what I'd recommend. What is the process of developing your own portfolio of inspiring imagery for designing and creating ideas? There's really no process for that. I collect images from all over any source and I just save them. A lot of times I will have a lot of just screen captures on my phone that I eventually have to send somewhere so that I can put them in a folder. Any ideas, I try whatever program I'm working on, I try to Google that. And so this is also another thing. When you look up images, be creative about how you Google, right? Googling the most knee-jerk reaction to what you're seeing is going to get you the same thing every other student's going to get. And so you need to be creative and dig deeper and find images within things that you wouldn't have just popped up. I mean, I think we all kind of know that, but there's no process to it. It's just wherever they come, I grab them and I steal them. Steal is loose. How do you differentiate between when it's advantageous to go for a hand drawing / handcrafting versus relying more on technology? It's a good question. So when I was in grad school for model making, I did my first semester completely on trace. I thought this is a cheap paper and I wanted to exploit it. I always liked yellow trace. And so my whole presentation, every drawing I did was on trace paper. Actually, each semester I did hand drawing, and I'm not going to talk about hand drawing, but more models. But the first semester it was all trace. The second semester was like crescent board. Then it was museum board. And then it was some Strathmore. I tried different material to draw on each time when I went that way, because I thought that there was a different sensibility to it. But when it came to modeling, I did one model that I had to laser cut because it was just repetitive, 30 different units with 15 different pieces per unit. And so I laser cut everything, but I was very conscientious about what left the burn marks. And so I have a model in my office that only has burn marks on half of it because I only laser cut half of it. The rest of it, I didn't want burn marks on. I cut by hand or I sanded off. They were big, thick walls, and I wanted those dark lines to read through. And so I used the part of technology as a strategy for building the model, which was nice. I think anything that you deal with at a small scale, like screens, laser cut. If you're dealing with mullions, you can laser cut. I tended to start painting models, which would cover up. You have to clean them up a bit before you can paint the cover, and it takes a few coats. Painting is actually a lot more difficult than it sounds like. However, scoring things I believe in. I like scoring materials. I know there's some faculty at the school, some that also work in the DigiFab and some in upper management, some other ones that are just don't get when students score context like materials. But I think there's something to that. If you get the material the right scale, score it and use these things to your advantage. I only laser cut whenever it's something that's ridiculously repetitive or it would just look better laser cutting. Otherwise, I prefer by hand because I like cutting something wrong and then seeing, if I actually shorten it up by 2 feet, I can have this kind of reveal to it. This is where I mean by even when I'm building final models, I'm still kind of designing it. And cutting it by hand allows me to mess up. I think my best ideas came from whenever I had very limited resources. So like at night, if I material and the model's due the next day, study model or not, I became creative about what I used in the process. And so I think limitations really push us creatively. So it's not relying on technology, it's exploiting it. And it's not doing things by hand, but exploiting that as well. Another practice, what is the best way to improve your drawing, designing, and better way to bring out your creativity? I think looking at examples, and since we share the art and architecture department library, look for the art books. And so I found these as a student and I used them whenever I started teaching the drawing class, but I found artists. There's a guy named Theodore Kotsky and it's Kautzky, something SKY, something like that. It's called Broad Strokes or pencil broad strokes, painting with watercolor, painting with pencil, sketching with watercolor, painting with pencil. I'm confusing the hell out of you, but it's one of those or all of them. And Theodore Kotsky did these. He would shave this oval tip on the pencil, and the way that he painted with it was just such a inspiration to me that I don't quite draw like him, but it inspired me to practice drawing in a different way. I also, on a very quick side note, really got passionate about. I couldn't draw from observation. I could draw with a ruler or a parallel bar fairly well because I was very OCD and that kind of appealed to my meticulous nature. But drawing curtains one morning, it was a Saturday afternoon and I had my window open and I was trying to draw how the curtain fell on the floor and it was maddening. I could not draw this thing. And so I was like, I got to learn how to draw curtains. I got to learn how to draw drapery. And so I think I might have just finished school. And so I snuck into our library and started looking at some of the art books in there, and I found a drawing of drapery of Michelangelo. It's that one right there. And so I fell in love with this drawing, and I thought, okay, I'm going to learn how to draw this. And so I found out the right size of it. I printed it off, scaled it correctly, line inch for inch, and then I copied it. I set a sheet of paper next to it, and I pretty much measured the drawing to copy it over. It was very analytical. It took me 2 days to do, but line for line, how did he do it? And then I did it again. This is the second one from it. I did it a few times because I used to give them for like donations of things, and because just kind of like the image. But I copied it. I looked at an example, and I literally tried to copy it as close as I could to it. And then I copied other art masters from the Renaissance and did a lot of things. But I think it's looking at stuff, finding something that you're inspired by and trying to literally copy it. Asking yourself, how do I make that line? I copied a lot of artists. And I found out Rembrandt cannot be copied. That guy is just on a genius level. I hope that answered your question. In terms of making a successive portfolio, should it be leaning towards showing my personality, style, or strategic in creating what the firm is looking for? Oof. That one, that's a good question. I would almost say you probably want to gear it towards more the firm. In some ways, yes. I think firms want to hire somebody that they feel like is a good personality fit to them. I mean, you don't want to get to a firm where you're just going to be another person that they just throw work to. And so you want to show them how you're doing work that's within their same realm. So if you're advertising to do a certain type of project or typology that they're doing, then you want to show these things, highlight them in your portfolio. Your personality and style, I think the style comes with the graphic of the book. That's going to sort of fit into it. The personality is a little bit harder to display in portfolio, I think. That's going to be more in your interview. You're going to hope to display that of who you are and your sort of natural disposition. When you do go in for firms, try to write down questions to ask them. There's nothing worse than interviewing and them asking you, well, do you have any questions for us? And you having nothing. And so keep in mind questions and try to think of, you can ask a few generic questions, but try to think of specific ones that is unique to that firm. And I think that might give you a little bit of an edge for it. Portfolios are tough. I don't feel like I'm a good person to give advice for a portfolio. I have made 12 different ones over the years, and each one had multiple versions. I don't know how to be a graphic designer. I try. I have somewhat of a sensibility, I think, but when it comes to portfolios, they're hard for me to critique. I'm not a good person for that question. You mentioned to find inspiration in architecture that are outside your typical style. How would you implement aspects of a building that is the cultural difference? This could be Japanese, Chinese, Italian, etc. All right, so that would depend on the building. So, for example, you wouldn't do, like if you're doing a house, you want to say, I want to make a house that's inspired by one of these cultures. Okay, that makes sense. But if you're doing a school, then you probably wouldn't pick a culture unless there's something specific about the culture that you want to pick up on with that school. So if it's in another culture. And so you could look at, we're doing a school, there's a called Webb Elementary for my firm. It's just a couple of minutes north of UTA on Cooper. And so we did some research on the population and found out that it was a predominantly Hispanic school. And so then we started looking into that culture and trying to find ideas, mainly abstract ideas of Serape to sort of use as an elevation idea. And so these are sort of subtle, more abstracted ideas that are a little modern, but still pick up on the culture that's represented by the school in the district around. That's one way. Also, another way, I used to give a project of drawing blank, an embassy. And so if you're doing an embassy in like Washington, D.C., then whatever culture, whatever country you're looking for, that's a perfect opportunity. Matter of fact, that's what those buildings do. There's a Swiss embassy in D.C., which is a gorgeous building, kind of looks like the 5 Points of Architecture by Le Corbusier. And a lot of the ideas inside of it are mimic things about the Swiss culture and the trees and materiality that they use. And so look for when it's appropriate. Sometimes it's not. And this is where you can just put it in your back pocket and use it later. But I love cultural things that are embedded in design. But it just this is one where it really has to be appropriate to the building program. This is fun. Any other questions, guys? All right. Well, good luck navigating the other half of your semester online, and maybe I'll see you on campus in the spring. If not, occasionally I'm up there sometimes during this semester. But I really appreciate all of you coming out. It made my night. I didn't realize it would be such a big crowd, so it was kind of exciting. I hope you enjoyed the lecture, and I hope you find something that you put into your own practice as a student. You guys are going to do great in architecture. You just have to keep pushing yourself. You have to be active about it. And we sometimes, or at least I can speak for myself, I fall in the habit of routine of not being active. And then it's like I remind myself, oh yeah, it's like I got to think about this each time. This is Nala. And she just sent you all a message. All right, guys. Well, thank you very much. Have a great night. Bye, everyone.